Well, hello, everybody. This is Tim Green with Rattle Magazine. Welcome to your critique of the week. It's Friday, February 16th. Thanks so much for joining me. Let's see. We got Winston Munns here, Jerry Stephenson, Mark Grinier, T. Coleman, Maney, Monica Dobos is here, Dick Westheimer, hey, Rattlers. James Langford is here, Cindy Guntherman, Katie Dozier in the next room over. We got Tom Barlow. We've got Sharon Ferrante, Nancy Sabanek. Good to see you. Sabanek, I should say. And another poet is here as well. Let's see, over on Facebook, we've got Radoslav Stoyanov is here, Jenny Middleton, and Tara Meslick McMahon. Nate Jacob is over there on Facebook. Good to see you all. So as always, we're going to do the critique of the week, and the purpose is to give that workshop experience. It's really valuable, where you get to have, you sit back, a poet sits back and gets to hear what people think about their poems, what works, what doesn't, how things are landing, what's confusing, what are our favorite lines, where we get lost, where we get bored. All those things are really important to hear from a writer. You don't get that very many places. It's tough to get it from friends and family because, people tell you what you want to hear, kind of. And this is a true, honest opinions of people who care about you as a poet and want your poems to be better. And so we'll talk about the best qualities, what works and what doesn't. Leave as many comments as you can. And the poets, of course, can read them on the chat windows on Facebook and YouTube. I'll share as many as I can too as we go. Now, we're going to be doing for the foreseeable future, I really want to get caught up, and so I'm going to be pulling poems from the oldest forward. And so the first poem we're looking at is from May 2023. I'm just going to go in the order they were received. Originally, we were pulling stuff at random and kind of doing it that way, years ago. And over time, a backlog of submissions kind of built up. And so, it used to be like, you'd wait like a month or two and that was fine. And now it's end up, the wait is like a year. And so we don't want that. So we're going to catch up. But if you're a regular and I say your name out here, we read your comments, I recognize you, I'm going to move you to the front of the line too. So if I see anybody, if you're watching this now and participating and leaving your comments and sharing your thoughts, and I see your name there, and the submission queue on Submittable for the critique of the week, we'll move you right up to the front so you don't have to wait. Everybody else, we're going to go from the order they were received. That's going to be the policy for a little while just because I want to get caught up, and then maybe we'll shift it around how we do it in the future too. But now let's take a look at our first poem this week. And now the first poem is by Russell Strutwick, and we've seen the first one before. It says it's a revision. So I think what happened is the poem was submitted. We read it and talked about it a couple weeks ago. I remember this being around Christmas time, I think. And then in, May 9th, 2023, Russell sent another version of this. You can see it on the screen right here. So I think we're gonna pass on this one. Let's see because there's really not much that I can tell. I remember the poem. Is this one The Frogman? I think, did we do this one too? Suffering Holiday. The Last Day of the Trip. Yeah, we did this one too. So we did this one around December. I think these are revisions of those poems, but they're close enough to what we talked about before that I think we're going to just go to the next submission. So let's do that. And next up, we will have, drumroll please, Richard Knickerbocker. And for general questions, this poem is called Energy to Spare, and Richard Knickerbocker from Florida says, how about this for an ongoing metaphor? So we'll see about this. And this poem is right here. Energy to Spare. On and on goes the power of the nuclear bomb. I can fall asleep at night with my television on. We've plants in bloom with energy today. They say the more I use, the less I choose to pay. I'm tickled by technology. There's nothing like the 21st century, a slippery slope for you and me. God bless my dearest and nearest utility. With energy to spare, G to spare, G to spare, more than we've ever seen anywhere. Energy to spare is my battle cry. Plug me into that outlet when I die. That's a good line. The other side of the coin is the radioactive waste. We thought we could load rockets full and shoot them into outer space. Since the atmosphere was growing for all it's worth, and there's nowhere secure to store it here on Earth. Don't you think our fission line has reached its end? those nuclear tattoos make headline news. Is it Einstein's revenge or the perforation blues? I say let's not leave our children chasing away this lightning radiation. For sure our fission line has reached its end. I say we turn on the power of the nuclear bomb. I can fall asleep at night with my TV on, addicted to the greatest high of technology. I'm a pusher of the power of my local utility. We've got energy to spare, G to spare, G to spare, more than we've ever seen anywhere. Energy to spare is my battle cry. Plug me in when I die. Heaven help us what we'll do when hell comes home for a barbecue. We may be cooked, but I'm still hooked on energy to spare, G to spare, G to spare, more than we've ever seen anywhere. Energy to spare is my battle cry. Plug me into that outlet when I die. So, interesting poem. That is Energy to Spare by Richard Knickerbocker. That's right. And so interesting poem. You know, we have the rhyme here, a sort of a ballad type format to the poem. And I think there's some interesting, there's the use of a refrain, but I think one of the main things is the refrain, which is this with energy to spare, G to spare, G to spare. Yeah, I think that refrain is like the wrong thing to refrain on. And I think this is maybe one of the weaker lines in the poem, actually. And then we get it over again. Because with energy to spare, G to spare, G to spare, it doesn't really do a whole lot. But there were some nice lines that I liked. I liked, where did they go? Energy to spare is my battle cry. Plug me into that outlet when I die. I think that was a good one. If you pick one refrain like this, maybe, and have a much shorter poem, as Tara Meslick McMahon says, I think this poem could work, she says, if much, much shorter. And I think if you made the poem, half the length and made the refrain this one, maybe that would work. There are some other ones, some lines that were nice too. What do we do when hell comes home for a barbecue? There's a nice rhythm to that and a nice, the rhyme there, the internal rhyme there with the do and the barbecue sounds nice. So I think that would work. And I'd pick one line to do the refrain and keep the poem pretty short. We have, let me think of a poem, from Poets Respond, that this kind of reminds me of a little bit. I'm gonna have to look. I have to scroll through Poets Respond. It's toward. Is it Jan? Let's see. Is it this one I'm thinking of? Oh, in my head, I think I'm combining two poems. Or does this one have a refrain? In the world that was before ours. So this is a poem by Janice D. Soderling from Poets Respond. I'll put it over here, if you can see it. Dolphin Legend of the World Before. And this is about nuclear war with Putin and Russia and things like that. And it's not the one I was thinking of. So in my head, I combined this poem, which has a similar rhyme. So you might want to check out this poem. Weirdly, this poem, the poem we're looking at by Richard, is a mashup sort of this poem and this other poem by Janice. Is it going to show up if I get the more poems? Real men don't take no shit from nobody. So there's this poem that Janice had. And I was thinking this was about nuclear war too, but this is a totally different poem. But this goes like this. White man, black man, yellow man, grief, doctor, farmer, soldier, chief, hittin', spittin', cussin' hard, bury their wives in the cold graveyard. And so that rhyme coming through that last line. And that's kind of what I imagine if you took that poem and spared up this energy to spare poem, and made it, smaller, not that small, but small enough where we just had a little refrain and a few lines that tied into that refrain. So you have that format that's really nice to read in a kind of folk ballad type poem. I think that could really work with this. Jerry Stephenson says, enjoy the rhyme, singing the song, some great lines and painted pictures, needs a dash of brevity, about 20%, allow room for the reader. Yeah. Winston Munn says I might aim this at 16 lines or maybe a 14 as a sonnet. Exactly. I do like the refrain. Yeah, and so I don't know if a sonnet's the right form, but some kind of maybe nonce form or some kind of form. I'm trying to think of a poem that has a refrain that we've published, where just the refrain is the last line of each stanza, and maybe there's like, it's like 4-line stanzas, say, and maybe like 4 or 5 stanzas of this. I think that's about the size. Another poet says this is villanellish, maybe looking for a form. That's another thing too. If you like, I didn't like the G. I think that the problem with the with energy to spare, G, energy to spare, G to spare, G to spare, there's just, it sort of just ends up being sounds by the end. And even though I know I can hear, so that's the point. It's supposed to be sounds. They don't mean anything anymore. You don't really want a poem that engages with people that way. You want to be sparking people's imagination constantly so they don't get bored and lost. And I think this line we get a little bored and lost with, so it's not a good refrain. But the other lines that were good, I think, could be used as good refrains. Let's take a really quick look. I'm just going to read through the poem one more time and sort of give a thumbs up or thumbs down for each line so we can know which lines are working and which lines are not, okay? On and on goes the power of the nuclear bomb. That's good. I can fall asleep at night with my television on. I like that. Oh, that's the other one. I thought this could be a good refrain too. I really like this couplet too. And maybe even have this one and the other one as like alternating refrains. That's an idea too. It needs to be tighter with a better form. And so those are some options. We've plants in bloom with energy today. They say the more I use, the less I choose to pay. So I think that works too. So I think the opening couplet works pretty well. I wouldn't stick with this form. Like I said, I'd bring in the refrain. But still, I think that works. Those lines work. I'm tickled by technology. There's nothing like the 21st century. And here, the first time, I feel a little forced in these lines. I'm tickled by technology. There's nothing like the 21st century. There doesn't really feel like it's coming out spontaneously in an interesting way. And so I'd cut this one. A slippery slope for you and me. God bless my dearest, nearest utility. And that's, I think the utility in century rhyme works, but otherwise I think there's just not a lot of meat in this stanza. With energy to spare, we already talked about that line, not a fan. More than we've seen anywhere. Energy to spare is my battle cry. Plug me into an outlet when I die. Another great line there, great couplet. The other side of the coin is the radioactive waste. And again, this gets a little wordy and clunky, this stanza here. I mean, notice how short this is. Notice how, the good lines split the difference sort of naturally between this length, which is a sort of too short forced, and this length, which is a sort of too clunky, and so it's like too long. The other side of the coin is the radioactive waste. We thought we could load rockets full and shoot them all into outer space. Since the atmosphere was growing for all it's worth, and there's nowhere secure to store it down here on Earth. Yeah, sort of so-so. It's a little more interesting than the previous stanza, not as good as the other one, so maybe tighten that up a bit. Those nuclear tattoos make headline news. Nuclear tattoos had me scratching my head a little bit. Yeah. Nancy Sabanik says unmetered rhyme loses cadence. And that's another thing, too. Really, a poem like this, it feels like it's a ballad form, which is a iambic foot. Oops, I didn't put my... I'm sorry. I got to put my do not disturb on. Anyway, the... So a ballad form is like that iambic foot. And sometimes alternating between 3 feet and 4 feet. It's sort of this basic ballad form. And that's the kind of feel this poem wants. And when a poem feels like it has meter and it wants to have meter like that, you should do it and actually do it accurately. And I think everything, plays better that way. But anyway, I was saying, though, the nuclear tattoos, I'm not sure what that is. I've never seen nuclear tattoos. I don't know if that sort of makes me wonder if this is supposed to be set in some futuristic place that's not now. And maybe I'm not interpreting the poem closely enough. Yeah. And so there's that aspect to it too. Is it Einstein's revenge or the I think that means it's supposed to be proliferation, not perforation. It may be autocorrect. I say, let's not leave our children chasing away this blightening radiation, for our fission line has reached its end. So, so Dick Weisheimer says, I still find it cliche and just covering old ground. And then Brian O'Sullivan comes back. I take Dick's point, and I wonder if expanding on plug me into an outlet when I die would be a good way to explore something beyond what the poet planned to say. And that's really what I'm trying to get at, and I think the poem should be done here, is that, if you focus on those really interesting lines, it stops being cliche. A poem about it saying, oh, we should be careful about nuclear waste, and It's just like, okay, sure. It's not really cliche as much as trite. It's just something that you don't need a poem to say. But plug me into an outlet when I die and is a great line. And so I think, spinning off that, we could get into a different, more interesting story. And I think that's what we should focus on here. Heaven help us. And this line feels like it should be 2 lines. This heaven helps. How do I get there? This heaven help us. What'll we do when hell comes home for a barbecue? That feels like it should be broken somewhere, like right there, But I like hell coming home for a barbecue. I think that's so why does that line work more than some other lines? Because it's very visual. Coming home for a barbecue, you get an interesting visual. And so I think, yeah. And then we get the repeats, but they're just repeating. And I think, yeah. So Morgan Feeney says, this is a great way to put it. She says, yeah, it would be more interesting to see this reframed as like a Kurt Vonnegut-ish advertising style jingle. Exactly. Or I was thinking of, I don't know if this reference is beyond most people, but Fallout, the video game series, if anybody, I mean, I confess, I like Fallout. I like Fallout 3 and 4. I don't really like Fallout New Vegas so much because it's all about the factions, but that's what my son's playing right now. But there's this whole sort of, it's after the nuclear war. And so there's all this like old remnants of advertising and like billboards and stuff all over the cities that you inhabit, the different versions of the game. And you're coming out of like a fallout shelter. And there's all these like happy, peppy, advertising about how great nuclear is all over on the billboards as you're walking through this post-apocalyptic wasteland. And that's the kind of like vibe I think could work with this poem. And so going in somewhere with that direction and focus on the great lines is the best refrains. And that's the where to go with this poem. So thanks for sharing that. Interesting one to look at. Once again, that was Richard Knickerbocker with Energy to Spare. Okay. Let me look over at Facebook before I leave, though. Yeah, Nate Jacob says, let's do, Jamie Middleton says, well, there's this whole thread that I... So first, Nate Jacob says, it's too sing-songy to be dark and ominous, too silly in a way to be taken seriously considering the weight of the issue at hand. I'd like it to be even darker to set off the lightness of the refrain's feel. So it's very well taken there. And then Jenny adds, but I think the tone shows detachment from the onslaught of news. Everything is a tragedy. The threat of more tragedy makes people feel flippant. I think that's what the poem is about. Yeah, and that's what I mean, like by that... just digging into that, leaning into that sort of that play between the silliness and the seriousness like the Fallout video game does, I think is a good way to go, and using that refrain to be interesting and surprising. And then Nate Jacob again replies to Jenny and says, agreed, I think it could go further in that flippancy, make the contrast between the darkness of the issue set off more starkly, the band playing on as the ship goes down in a way. So there we have that too. Yeah, great comments, great back and forth there from Jenny. Colin Sandberg over there, I think it's a new voice, says, disjointed line lengths and stanza sizes tend to make me want to flip the page to the next poem. And yeah, so back to what also over on YouTube, I think it was Nancy Sabanek said, but use actual meter. It's not that hard. Like you can hear, just read out loud, you can hear the beats, count them on your fingers. Make sure you have the right number of beats in every line. On and on. Let me hear. Ready? Watch this. On and on goes the power of the nuclear bomb. We got 7 right there, right? 7. And if you want to do 7 feet, go ahead, but just make it consistent. Because once you start having, using song like that with a regular rhythm, we want it to be regular. Like that's what we're looking for. And it feels wrong in a way that's not, there's a way that playing in variation. This is really a thing. And maybe this is an important point that maybe people might not understand. How music works is having irregularity and surprise, variation within regularity. So you have the beat going, and then you have the guitar solo over the top of that, or whatever it is. And so there's the regularity plus the variation, and the interaction between those two things is very stimulating to our minds, and it gets us moving and gets us energized and gets our synapses firing. But the thing is, when you have a regular beat. With language, there's already so much variation within the language that it already sort of has the solo and it has the background beat at the same time because there's so much variation in the way, even within stressing certain syllables in a stress-based language like English, there's still so much variation in the way we articulate the phonemes as we move through words, that it's already jazz. I mean, that's the thing. Formal poetry is like already jazz. And so keeping on the meter and having just the variety of sounds that you naturally would is music already. And so keep that variety, keep that regularity going, and the variety is already there. And so, so if you're going to have 7 beats, have 7 beats every line, and we'll really enjoy the poem even more. Okay, so let's move on to another poem. And next up, we have, let's see, this is Vanessa Brazier, Confessions of a Void. And Vanessa says, Vanessa's from, let's see, Los Angeles, right here down the street. Well, down the hill, down the mountain, about an hour away. I have yet to read or see any work that reminds me of mine or is similar. It can be discouraging and sometimes makes me feel like what I write isn't art or up to par. Does my work have any artistic style? Any pointers to make it sound more poetic and artsy? I honestly just write from experience and the heart, so sometimes I feel it may be too specific or raw. Okay, and so here's the first poem, and it was called Alone in the Night. So here we go. This is, again, Vanessa Brazier, Alone in the Night. Alone in the night, it's when I come alive, feeling immortal. I'm not scared to die, way past my limits, but still craving a high. So I'll pop one more pill and aim for the sky. Don't know why I'm like this. I don't know why, but I need to be faded just to get by. Don't try and get close. I'm not worth your while. A black hole of a soul. I'm just seeking control. Baggage is crazy. I can't seem to let go. I'm depressed, I'm a mess, I try not to overdose, I can't shake off my demons, they're taking control, they keep asking the price I have set for my soul. It's the same old battle, I know it gets old. Now, but I'm stuck in a loop, and I'm paying the toll. And so as the poem, I think maybe Unknown Cipher is a pen name, maybe? We'll see if the other poem has that too. But so this poem, I think, falls into what a lot of submissions do for Rattle, where it doesn't have a lot of specificity. It doesn't have a lot of storytelling. One of the really telling notes, and I'm being careful not to show the addresses and stuff of people, but in the commentary, let's see, I honestly just write from experience in the heart. So sometimes I feel it may be too specific or raw. The thing is, we think that poems shouldn't be specific because if they're general, then everybody can relate to them. But the truth is, how a poem works, and we've said this thousands of times probably on the critique of the week, but how a poem works is that we inhabit the speaker. We become, I guess I should say, the speaker of the poem, the voice of the poem becomes us. We become the instrument that plays the poem. And so it becomes this like empathy engine where we get to sort of inhabit the body and the breath of the person who's writing the poem or speaking the poem. And so the more specific you get in the storytelling, the more that you're precise and specific, the more we can connect and relate and feel that empathy. So there's a feeling that we need to be general so it can relate, but that's just it's just a completely misinformed opinion. We want to be really specific. We want to show the details of our stories and tell them in the nuanced and unusual and all the aspects of that they are, because that's what is actually the most engaging. So avoid the generalities. Be specific. Don't shy away from that. And a poem like this, Alone in the Night, stays with too much generality to really feel connected to it. And so I'll tell you, this is my thoughts, as I'm going through the poem, reading it. Alone in the night, it's when I come alive, feeling immortal. I'm not scared to die. So at first, we have nothing to go on. It's called Alone in the Night. I'm wondering, is this like a vampire going on? I mean, there's no detail about what the night actually is like. Where am I alone? We know it's the night, so we have a sense of the time. But there's no setting or scene. It's just sort of a voice floating in the darkness of the night, I guess. And I'm at this point, I'm wondering if we're like a vampire type poem. Way past my limits, but still craving a high. So I'll pop one more pill and aim for the sky. And so we still have this sort of disembodied person. And now we know, oh, it's not like a vampire. It's somebody who's, addicted to drugs. So I'll pop one more pill and aim for the sky. Don't know why I'm like this. And so what can you what can you visualize and sort of feel? There's two ways maybe to make a poem kind of come to life. One is by creating a sense of the place, a scene, and so that the mind's eye gets to work, that imagination, that movie in our head that we get to see and experience. We can start with that, or the voice can be so unique that we end up being sort of drawn in by the voice. But when they say, don't know why I'm like this, there's nothing particular or distinctive about saying something like that, and there's not a single image in that line or anything we can see. So really, as far as registering to us, a line like that, don't know why I'm like this, I don't know why, but I need to be faded just to get by. There's the rhyme, but there's no sense of who's saying it or what we're actually talking about or anything being stimulated. And so it just really, as a reader, it just rolls right by and doesn't connect at all. It doesn't engage. We forget it at the moment we pass by. So stuff like this we want to avoid. We want to build a scene, tell an actual story. Everybody's really wants to hear each other's stories. I mean, that's why we're drawn to making art and writing not just poems, but any kind of thing. That's why you want to talk to strangers, on a park bench when they sit down next to you. We're curious about each other. We like to hear each other's stories. It's really a survival instinct because we learn that way. And so we love to hear your stories. So tell the actual story and don't be, abstract and distant and generalized, because then we don't feel like we're connected. So tell, don't just say, I'll pop one more pill. Like, what pills are they? What do they look like? What are the shapes? What are the color? What is the container that was holding them? How do they feel in your hand? How do they feel in your mouth? All those things are things that make us really feel connected and experience the empathy that a poem can create. So that's my advice for this poem, is to be much more specific than this. Yeah. And I haven't looked at the comments yet, but if you look at the comments, everyone's saying the same kind of things in their own way. So Deb T says, I agree. I think this writer has an interesting story to tell, but isn't giving us the specifics to feel her situation. Tom Barlow says the writer might try writing this in the third person, which sometimes liberates the poet to add details that otherwise might feel embarrassing. There's the great suggestion too. Dick Westheimer says, in poems like this, the poet thinks she is being daring and revealing, but here she is really withholding difficult material from us and likely themselves. And there's that too. So what is it that, the real thing about the poem, I can see a poem really working this way, is you're describing in detail what it's like to pop those pills that we're talking about. Like, what do they feel like? What do they taste like? What's the experience like? And then dig deeper into the, why am I doing that? And that's what Dick Westheimer is talking about here. What are you avoiding saying about yourself, about the actual situation? Because the truth is, we're all layers psychologically. Some layers know that truth, and other layers of your brain, your mind, have that blocked out. And what art really does is let those layers of our consciousness speak with each other. And so what does your subconscious have to tell you that your conscious doesn't want to listen to? And that's really the most interesting part of poetry. And that's what we as readers can learn the most from and be most compelled by and want to remember by. Yeah. Deb T asks if I have a poem on this topic. Okay, sure. Let's see. Good suggestion for pulling up a poem, Deb. Here's a poem that came to mind. This is Sam Sachs, and this is Lorazepam by Sam Sachs. A different type of medication, really, but sort of similar way we can go about writing a poem. This is Sam Sachs, Lorazepam. I don't know shit about the throat of a sparrow, how it can sing and fly at the same time. This couch is a sovereign object, this back a Cadillac on cinder blocks. I once thought for something, rather, on my way to the kitchen for something to eat. I bit into an apple, quite the achievement. I wanted to be high, so lied to the doctor about my anxiety. The panic attacks began then. Naming the disease made it open like a primer in my chest. Wicked mouth, peeling apple after reading, their skins are poison. Same goes for the seeds. My man is a monster, gunfire in the street, praise the demigod, pharmacy for this calm blood remedy, which lets me do nothing. My back pinned to the cushion again, my body this magnificent prison, the ceiling above bigger than any sky, one a bird might fall out of, singing as it dies. That's from rattle number 48. Sam Sachs's Lorazepam. And you can see the detail in that poem. There's a little self-referential meta poetry kind of thing. I don't know shit about the throat of a sparrow. I don't know how to be poetic about this as sort of the leaping in. But then we get these great descriptions. This couch, a sovereign object. This back, a Cadillac on cinder blocks. Like we get all these details to get to experience what it feels like. And then, as Dick Westheimer was saying, diving in exactly to this ending, which was the revelation that Dick is talking about, the thing that probably, Sam or the speaker of the poem didn't want to confront himself, but then the poem forces you to, which is how we heal and grow and how we all can do that together through poetry. My body, this magnificent prison, the ceiling above bigger than any sky, one a bird might fall out of, singing as it dies. So there you go. There's an example of a poem that you can do something similar, but use a lot of detail and specificity to make the poem come to life and engage with readers. Okay, let's move on because I want to get through as many as I can. We've only gone through 3. I want to do like 8 or so at a time. I don't know. Anyway, let's take a look again. There's another poem sent in. It's probably going to be similar, but we'll see if we have the similar advice from the second poem. And again, I think the poet, so Unknown Cipher is the pen name going by. And this is Coping Mechanisms. I tried to cut my heart out of my chest in 7th grade. I'll never forget the blood running down my chest as I dropped the blade. I felt the feelings rush out, and what hope I had left proceeded to fade. Fuck it. I wanted to do the same when I was a freshman, when I knew I shouldn't have, but I let him. Surrender my essence to a nigga who didn't deserve sex, only to have him set up to be recorded and broadcasted as some type of misogynistic weak flex. I turned 18 and finished high school, so I retired my blade for a brand new tool, a pill with 4 sections and 2 X's. It made me forget about all the things that didn't bleed out of my chest. When I turned 21, I was fully dependent on 6 pills a day to maintain and not end it. So this poem, much better at that detail. So this poem we can really relate a lot more because of the specificity. So it's nice to see this. The first poem was sort of one way that doesn't work, and this is the way that does work. So a very clear contrast between the two. The one thing I would say, cutting my heart out of my chest and the blood, that's all kind of trite imagery, and it maybe come up with something different. If you look back at the Sam, Sachs poem, all these metaphors Sam was using are really interesting and unique and original, and that's something to more to aim for. Coming up with metaphors for what you're feeling and experiencing. And so, talking about the throat of a sparrow, the Cadillac on cinder blocks, the apple metaphor, the peeling of it, all these things, my back pinned to a cushion, the magnificent prison, those kind of things are things you never heard or seen before that we're sort of putting into people's minds. And so finding more unique imagery like that is something to aim for. But I think that the problems with the last poem are taken care of here because we actually have the storytelling. We're not holding back. And so a good example of and maybe growth or a poem that works better. So go in this direction with your writing, I'd say. Anything else to add? I think, the poem feels kind of rough around the edges because of the variation in line lengths and things like that. But given the type of poem it is, I think, I would probably break it out differently myself. But I think that the roughness of it works. So that's not... let's see. Mary King says, could say I tried to cut out my heart but couldn't find it. Yeah. But anyway, so that's the thing that's kind of holding this poem back is that hearts and blood and stuff are just overused symbols already. So finding new ways to say things is the sort of the next step. Okay, let's move on to the next poet. But I think it was interesting to talk about these 2 poems. Thanks for sharing them. Let's go next to... where do we go? Oh yeah, this is it. Sorry. Here we go. So next up, we're going to go to... Larry Cavaney. And Larry sent a bunch of stuff in. So this is something else from Larry. Here we go. Larry Cavaney, and the poem is Jeff Woke as King. Jeff woke as king, made decisions about many things. It's okay just to fuck. It's okay to just drink. It's okay to just smoke. It's okay to just lie. If you need to, quit your job. Shopping, chorus, all clubs. Trust your mom. Fresh air. Most virgins. Bernie Sanders. Don't trust the government. Cats. Bad lettuce. Well, interesting. And so there's some interesting aspects to this. Jeff woke as king. The idea that I think Jeff is a nice start. The specificity of Jeff, I think, works. Jeff woke as king. It makes you a little curious, stimulates that, just because it's something specific, at least. Made decisions about many things. I think it's pretty boring. It's okay just to blah, 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 blah. Quit your job, shopping, chorus, all clubs. Trust your mom, fresh air. What's interesting about this poem is where it goes to trust your mom, fresh air, most virgins, Bernie Sanders. It's such a strange list. It's kind of got me chuckling a little bit. Don't trust the government, cats, or bad lettuce. I kind of liked the surprising use of where that is. I mean, I don't know. It's strange. Yeah. James Langford says, cats and bad lettuce caught my attention after the roll. I think there's a little spark there. I think there's not much going on in the poem. But at the end, riffing on this list came up with some kind of strange thing that actually worked to be interesting. And so maybe find more about that. I think maybe the heart of this poem is that trust, those two lists of what to trust and what not to trust. And I don't know how to build that into more of a poem. But it's interesting. But very sparse and not really fleshed out, and not a lot to go on beyond that. Yeah, Mark Grinner says the most interesting thing for me is the lettuce. And yeah, it is. Don't trust. Yeah. Yeah. Also, Morgan Feeney says confused by the use of capitalization. It just feels, given the way it's written out, and sometimes, two periods here, like it's supposed to be an ellipses, but mostly not. There's capitalization some places, not. It's really sort of a random jumble of things. Doesn't instill a lot of confidence. Dick Wettimer says, is it strange just to be strange in the end? Maybe. And maybe if there was a better ramp up, just being strange at the end would be interesting enough to hold the poem. Right now, there's something interesting. But not enough. It's very slight and very sort of haphazard and sketched off. And, I think could use more storytelling. Mania is an interesting one. I wouldn't have known the final list bit or list of things to trust or not trust without help. And that's part of it too. Like it's doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. Mark Goodrich says generated by AI. I don't know. Probably not, but you never know. I don't know why somebody would want us to critique an AI poem. Monica Doba says, does AI curse? I think they do have those guardrails on, which make it boring. So, anyway, interesting poem. So that's about all we can say about that. Clean it up, take it more seriously, and, notice what's interesting and then build upon that. Okay. Next up, we have, and I should just bear with me for 1 second, because I really should have marked that I read these, because otherwise I'm going to be confused later. So I'll do that behind the scenes. I'm marking down little labels that I've read them. Okay. Next up we're up to June 5th, 2023, and this is Ed Aust, Honey Run. No general questions. Actually, two poems, Honey Run and another. I'm trying to think. I'm trying to look at what I see here. There's two. It looks like there might be an accidental poem on the end of the first poem. So I think we're only going to read the Honey Run part that's in one font, and then it changed pages and the font changes. I think that's wrong. So Honey Run. Let's see what this is. Honey Run. Monica Dobo, sorry, says, I like the title. Yeah, I do too. It's a good title. And it sparks my, sparks my interest. Honey Run. I pledge allegiance to Honey Run Road, that pitted one-lane ribbon of asphalt zigzagging up from the ranch lands of Chico to the scorched ponderosas of Paradise. I'll just say, I love the detail in there, and there's great sound and rhythm too. So we were talking about detail in the previous poems. This is the kind of detail that make a poem vivid and come to life. So Honey Run Road is an interesting name for a road, and it's a good title. And then pitted one-lane ribbon of asphalt zigzagging up from the ranch lands of Chico is just a great description of that, to the scorched ponderosas of Paradise. Its hairpin curves, volcanic cliffs, sheer canyon drops, no guardrails, signs, pullovers, stay centered, resist drifting, honk at every bend. I race down Honey Run Road, wet with sweat, windows rolled down, gripping the wheel of my 58 Chevy, alert for deer, bobcats, cyclists on the switchbacks. See how light flickers in the dark ribs of live oak pine. I dream I'm sailing off Honey Run Road, a sudden silence, soaring with the birds of prey above the dusty kingdom of rattlesnakes, wild blackberry, dry chaparral of old Maidu County, to join the carcasses of rusting pickups and bones of old miners baking in the sun below. Great descriptions again. I flash back to Honey Run Road, its wavy pavement and perils, and to the memory of its old covered bridge, consumed by recent fire, into the stony outcrops around which she coils, loose boulders rolling down with beauty and hazards for all. Yeah. So this poem is interesting. I mean, like I said, great descriptions in it. And it's something that, I don't care if I relate to a poem at all whatsoever. That's the weirdest. I'd prefer not to relate to a poem, but I do relate to this one. Because, living up Paradise in California is very much like Wrightwood, which if you see my little thing at the bottom, I'm in Wrightwood, California. It's 6,000 feet. There's windy roads up to here. All the imagery and details look very accurate to me for mountain roads coming up, all the old rusted out cars like you can find, and you're hiking down below the roads. There's a whole bunch of cars all over the place that people died there. It's really strange, sort of surreal to know that, and then driving up and down these roads are dangerous. I mean, 2 people died in the last 2 months coming up the roads here. So all that's really interesting and great details. But where does the poem really go? It's a poem, sort of ironically maybe, that's about a road but doesn't really go anywhere. So I pledge allegiance to Honey Run Road, the pitted one-lane ribbon of asphalt. It describes it really well. But to me, and I'm going to see if other people... Yeah, exactly. So Monica Dobo says, what am I to take from it? And that's the thing. It doesn't really go anywhere. We had a Poetry Space episode about turns not too long ago. We talked about, there was that whole discussion with sonnets online and Diane Seuss's sonnets, and how what makes them a sonnet is not that they're 14 lines, but that there's a volta, there's a turn in that container. And they need to go somewhere and do something. Like you set up this beautiful scene, and then you have to set it up though for a reason. And to have some commentary on it, to have some, different way of looking at something, that kind of thing, where you start in one place, you paint this beautiful scene of one place, and you use that for a purpose. And this doesn't feel like it had a purpose. It's described very well, but doesn't dig into anything about, why did this poem have to be written? That's the thing that doesn't actually work. Let's see. So Morgan Phoenix has great stanzas, but maybe this poem needs to be cut down to just one of those stanzas. It feels like it needs to find the point. Katie Dozier already said, love how it captures the rhythm of the swerving road, though I do wish it had a turn. And that's what it kind of needs. Good pun there. So let's carry on and see how the ending went, so we can talk a little bit more about what we mean by that. I raced down Honey Run Road, wet with sweat, windows rolled down, gripping the wheel of my 48 Chevy, alert for deer, bobcats, cyclists at the switchbacks. Just all great descriptions. See how the light flickers in the dark ribs of live oak and pine. I dream I'm sailing off Honey Run Road in sudden silence, soaring over the birds of prey. I mean, this is we shift from the memory to a dream of it, and the fact that it's still haunting, which is kind of interesting. and that's as close as we get to some kind of commentary on it, though. We don't really dive into that. Why am I dreaming about it? I dream I'm sailing off Honey Run Road in sudden silence, soaring with birds of prey above the dusty kingdom of rattlesnakes, wild blackberry, dry chaparral of old Maidu County, to join the carcasses of rusting pickups and bones and old miners baking in the sun below. And so here, I mean, if we commented on the fact that I'm dreaming of this, and why am I dreaming of it, maybe, if there's just some reason that this poem, it was pulled out of the subconscious to be written, and why is it coming up in dreams? That's not really explored. It's just sort of stated that it's coming up in dreams, but why am I imagining my death here? Like, why here, and why my death, and why? I mean, that just doesn't come through in the poem, and there's a reason poems are written. There's a message that's trying to give, and it doesn't really dig into that. It just keeps showing the same scene. So I flash back to Honey Run Road, its wavy pavement and perils, and to the memory of its old covered bridge, consumed by recent fire. And so maybe the consumed by recent fire, I thought maybe as I was reading this the first time, that was going to be a turn, and we'll talk about how the fire, how that related to driving off the road, maybe. But then we just moved on from that and to the stony outcrops around which she coils, loose boulders rolling down, with beauty and hazards for all. And with beauty and hazards for all, it's sort of a summary at the end of the descriptions. We got great descriptions, and then we ended with a summary of the fact that we had descriptions. And there's no reason, we don't know why the poem is being shared. Like, what's compelling about this is the only thing that's missing. And I think it's there, underneath the surface. There's a reason why this is coming up and why it's a thing that you wanted to write a poem about. It's just not coming out yet. So dig into that. And it might be this recently consumed by fire, and what that means. It could be, digging into why I'm dreaming about it too. I think it's one of those two. I think both doors, like if you imagine, no pun intended, a freeway road, you sort of get these off ramps where you could explore something new, and like this is what the road was getting me to, is this off ramp where I'm at this area now. And we sort of drove by both off ramps, which was the fact that we were dreaming of it, and then the fact there was a fire, or sort of like turn off if you'd like to explore this town, but we didn't. We just kept going on the same highway. Okay, let's see the other poem, and I'm looking forward to it too because the descriptions are so nice, really well written, as Dick Westheimer said, I think. And I don't know if did I read this out loud. Dick said, color me jealous of the poet's command of language and image. Yeah, me too. Great in that poem. Oh, there's an interesting point that I sort of didn't notice too. D. Coleman and PMB both point this out. We'll look back at this for a second. The Honey Run Road, it starts with Pledge of Allegiance and then ends with some actual lines from Pledge of Allegiance, with beauty and hazards for all, kind of like is with, what is it? Justice for all? What is how I haven't said the Pledge of Allegiance so long. With something and justice for all. So it has that same rhythm, and maybe that's the thing to explore is, how justice, goes with, either the fire or the fact that the road's dangerous but still there. Maybe that's the thing that we're trying to get into, but it's still just a passing glance. It's some kind of deeper meaning to the poem. Yeah. Liberty and justice. Thank you to another poet in D. Coleman. I don't know, just one of those blanks. I was in school 30 years ago. Okay, so let's look at the other poem now. It's not that... I think this is... See how the font changes? And this is just... Yeah, this is just a whole different poem. It happens to be on the same file by accident, I think. Let's look at Mercy Fish. Or Marcy Fish, I guess. Marcy Fish. And again, these are poems by Ed Aust. Okay, Marcy Fish. November twilight, blue is the grass on which we kneel. In a metal pail, my older brother and I prepare a brew for Marcy Fish, the neighbor girl in the yellow house halfway up the block. We both like Marcy, scrawny legs, freckled cheeks, her gallops and her grins. But then last night she turned evil in her sleep, and now we must do something. In the watery paste we combine soggy maple leaves, fistfuls of dirt, 6 leathery black walnut hulls, a dozen stink beetles, tree bark, and dead one-legged mantis. Marcy Fish will drink our brew and will turn into a toad. I'll hypnotize her, my brother insists. If I tell her to drink it. She'll have no choice. My brother is a genius. He uses words like wicked and boss and knows his way in the world. The concoction thickens like the growing darkness about us. I imagine Marcy's hazel eyes turned upward in a trance. Soon we will be called back to our house for potato soup with popcorn, but First, we must complete our deed as cold wind gusts through our thin cotton jackets. And that's how the poem ends there. Marcy Fish. And so again, Dick Weston is, what? You don't say the pledge before every rattle event? No, I didn't even say it in high school. I didn't like the under God aspect of it, and so I protested. But anyway. Marcy Fish. So this poem is similar, and it paints a really great scene, but then again, we don't get to be told, we don't get to explore what's really going on like an emotional, psychological level. Why did this poem have to be written? So there doesn't feel like there's a whole lot of things at stake. To me, another poet says it's a speculative poetry, and I think this is a childhood memory to me. Me and my brother thought we'd do this. I've done, I think everybody does stuff similar to this. And that's the thing. So Monica Doba says, I don't know why the neighbor turned into an evil thing. And that just sort of hangs there. But then last night she turned into evil in her sleep. And I didn't take that literally. I just think that to me, that was like a childhood imagination that we do, and then you do like mean things to each other. That's what kids do very often. But then, you could take it as it's a sort of a speculative piece. I didn't, though. I think it's just a memory, and that's just the sort of irrational, imaginative excuse to be cruel that the kids made up. But then why do we don't lean into that? We don't explore that at all. And if she does actually get evil in her sleep, that's worth more than a sentence. So, as Winston Munn says, where's the surprise? Where's the beef? James Langford says her gallops and her grins was very nice. Yeah. Morgan Feeney says, I love this as a novel rather than a poem. And so how do you, it's a good question maybe. So since this comes up in both places, both these poems sort of, they're really imaginative and vivid and create the scene really well, but then we're saying they don't do anything. And so how do you do that? And how you do that is to have some kind of transition. That's the volta in a sonnet. That's the cut in a haiku. That's the plot pivot point in a novel. Like you need to have an arc of progression, no matter how big or small the piece of writing is, to make it be compelling and interesting. And so how can you push forward? So instead of the ending, but first we must complete our deed as a cold wind gusts through our thin cotton jackets. We end there, where we're still, making the brew is where we end up. So we have this should we really trust that Marcy is evil? Is this just our imagination? That's kind of where we're sitting. We're making this, brew that we're going to hypnotize her and force her to drink, but it just ends there. So tell us what happened later, maybe, look back at that, maybe from the future. And I was just thinking as I was reading this about, totally unrelated, George Bilgier's book that's coming out, Cheap Motels of My Youth, our chapbook prize winner that you'll be getting. It's at the printer right now. All subscribers will be getting it in about 2 weeks or less, maybe. But that has a he's sort of sitting at a gas station drinking a Coke as like a 9-year-old, and he thinks, and he talks a little bit at the end about how he has no idea that in the future an old man will be writing about the way the can feels in his hand or whatever. And so there's that movement in time from George now in his 60s to the flashback, and the flashback being aware of the future. That kind of jump where we look back at it, or and sort of commented it from the future, or tell what happened later in the story. Something, more can happen. Another poem that's just a great example, if we want to pull up examples, and I think it's another good thing to talk about. It was a recent guest, and I should really, Joshua Mensch, and the poem was an act of sabotage. So a similar kind of, but I want you to, as we read this poem, we're going to read this poem again. I'm not going to let Joshua read it out because I talk a lot faster. I'll read faster than Joshua. It's 3.5 minutes. But watch the progression of this poem, and how in this poem, an act of sabotage, we move through different scenes and the plot progresses and then has some commentary on it. That's what we're talking about here. And so I think this is a great example of the way the poem pushes forward. I might have talked about this on a critique of the week by happenstance already. An act of sabotage. Because I was young and heretical, I wanted to be a radical, I spiked trees to save them. This, I was told, was the right thing to do. Each tree found with a spike ruins the forest around it. It was true, of course, the lumberjack's logic. Practical is to find the spike. So just to pause, though. So because I was young and heretical, so we already have some commentary on that. I was young and heretical. That's why I was doing this. I wanted to be a radical. I spiked trees to save them. So we already get some thoughtfulness about what was going on. This, I was told, was the right thing to do. Again, more commentary on why I was doing it. Like, why was I doing it? That's like the interesting thing. Each tree found with a spike ruins the forest around it. It wasn't true, of course. The lumberjack's logic, practical, is to find the spike cut beneath it. But being young and eager to see myself in the act of saving trees, I whacked nails into bark at my height and felt very militant and right. Years later, I met a man with a missing thumb. Half of one hand was gone, and still being young, I asked him what had happened. I was cutting wood, he told me. A nail in a log wrecked the chain off the saw and whipped his hand clean through. So now he rides a mower for the church. Though it was many years before and somewhere else, I felt ashamed. A man's life, possibly, for a tree that would be cut down anyway. What dumb advice. I remembered the man who had given it to me, mid-30s, mustached, the wraparound sunglasses and a sleeveless tee, holding a paddle. He was a river guide. We were a rubber raft. Who leaned in to whisper the name of this group, Earth first, but don't tell anyone, and offer useful tips for conspiring, sugar and gas tanks destroying engines, loosen lug nuts topple trucks, flames ruin wood raped from the earth. And of course spiking trees, an effective means to defend against the enemy. I sat before the enemy, ashamed, and told him what I'd done years before. He told me not to worry. I'd botched the job, and anyway, the nail he hit was one he'd put there himself and then forgotten. But chainsaws are smarter now, so deaths and injuries are rare, though he'd agreed that I was right to feel like an asshole. There are better ways to save the earth, he said. There was a shadow on the field from a cloud that had grown heavy while we were talking, and were it not for the wind, it might have rained. I could hear the cries of the gulls from the sea beyond the hill, and the bell of a church began to ring. Later that night my father made a fire in a ring of stones. Flames tongued out of the wood like sea anemones searching for food. We had chosen nature. The quiet burning of expired stars in a place without a roof, where the rushing of the surf was our radio. To keep warm, we burned wood and talked about the future, which seemed far away, theoretical, and entered into a new conspiracy, a dream in which we were happy and our existence felt justified and good because we were moral people, and the trees forgave us our sins because they understood. And so look at the transitions we have. It's a very similar poem. In sort of looking back at youth and what we were doing, as far as the subject goes. But we talk about it. We have some commentary about it. We talk about having done it and how it felt. When we fast forward to a new scene where we run into a lumberjack who had lost half of his hand because of a nail in a tree. And he felt ashamed, so we have some more commentary about that. Then, as if that weren't enough, and it probably would have been enough, but what makes the poem really great is we take one extra leap, even beyond that, to later that night, talking over the fire with my father, and how the fire, where the flames go, and all that stuff, and the stars, and that kind of commentary, expanding it out even farther. And so it's those extra leaps. So we don't just get, like if this story were just told, really vividly, When I was young, I spiked the trees, and this is how it felt, and I could describe it in really great detail, but just left it there. That wouldn't be enough to make a great poem. It's moving beyond that. It's painting the scene as the first step and the really important part, but then moving on and making transitions and having that juxtaposition, those cuts, those turns, those voltas, whatever you want to call it, from one scene to another is what allows us to learn something from the poem. And so what can you do in this poem here, Marcy Fish? You can just use those kind of maneuvers as like possibilities. Like think of it that way. So we get a good description of it. We could talk about, we can move to maybe what Marcy did last week, even though we don't think it's something that has to do with her becoming evil. We could talk about running into Marcy in the future, again, as an adult. We could talk about our own daughter or our own son witnessing them doing some, evil thing, even though at that age it's really not, because it's just how kids are, but they haven't figured it out yet. So we could dive into that direction. We could go to another scene that happened completely unrelated later that night that maybe has some subtle commentary we didn't notice at the time. There's so many places you can go from this scene, but you got to go somewhere. And you can't just leave it at the scene. You can't just leave it on the road, the Honey Run Road. You can't just leave it in the making this brew. You got to do more. You turn more. Make it, have a reason. Go somewhere. Yeah. And so that is my advice for this: is go somewhere else. It's like, a room, a poem is like a room or a house, and there's got to be more than one room in it, really. Okay, so that is a long diatribe. So Debtise, I'm curious about how they end up thinking Marcy turned evil. That's a great place to go. Dick Westheimer, I went to this later, but I'll pull the poem forward to how we as adults haze and try to cure our friends. There's that too. Let's see. Yeah. The initial setup, this is Mark Grenier, suggests some kind of sexual interest, but it disappears in the brew and leaves me wondering why. There is that too. There's the sort of implied threat of like sexual violence going on there too a little bit, but then then they start to feel young and it sort of goes away and you almost forget that you felt that way at the first. So that's an inconsistency too. But all those things are things to explore. Yeah. Let's see any other comments. Yeah, so Catherine Rose says, growing darkness around us. And maybe that's a place to explore the characters. That is a great line, too. There are a lot of good lines. Yeah, right here. The concoction thickens like the growing darkness around us. Yeah. Okay. So I think that's going to wrap it up. That's been an hour. And it's been, I think, a really good set of poems to talk about. So thanks for sharing this hour with me. Rose says, why the random indent here? I did wonder about that too. I'm not a huge fan of random indents, although I've done them myself occasionally. I'm guilty. BMB says, being called home for dinner is a great place to turn. Debtise says, maybe they are just pretending that you turned evil. That was my interpretation. I thought that they just sort of wanted to be cruel like kids do. I mean, when I was a kid, there was this new family in town. It wasn't really me. I was like the voice of conscience, but I went along with so much stuff. We just terrorized that family with like pranks, kind of, that were like, to us, they were funny, but they were really mean. And that's just something, I don't know, kids do. It's sort of bad. Yeah. So Cindy Guntherman says, how did she suddenly turn evil in her sleep too? I mean, you see this too. I mean, my interpretation was that she's not evil. It's just kids. But, some people are taking that really literally, and that's something to explore and explain so we're not confused. Let's see. Brian O'Sullivan says, I could even see the poem pivoting to how whole populations or countries, even former allies, turn on each other. That's a great way to do it too. I mentioned moving in time. Another thing to think about it moving is the camera. We zoom way out or zoom way in. If you're sort of stuck with a poem that's sort of only on one page, there was a reason it was going to be written. And then, moving sort of the director's view is one of the ways to get it out there. Moving in time to a whole new scene, zooming extreme close up to one detail, going way back out and looking at the whole country, the whole world. Some kind of movement in the frame and the perspective is what can open up the poem. And that really we're exploring in sort of a nonlinear, symbolic way our lives. And that's what poetry is really doing, is examining, exploring it, using these sort of associative tools that we have that are sort of outside of logic, but eventually make logical sense. How we create logic and meaning in the first place is through poetry in this way. But anyway, that was two really interesting poems, though. Great details by Ed Aust, the Marcy Fish, and the Run. What was it? Honey Run? Yeah, Honey Run. Anyway, thanks everybody for sharing these. Really fun critique once again. I'll remind you that this week's guest in the Rattlecast is going to be... No, that's not right. Oh, I didn't get it yet. Oops. It's still on my flash drive. This week's guest is going to be Sally Ashton. Did I put it? Maybe. Let me see. I don't think I did, though. No, I did not. So... let's see how long it takes to get it off my flash drive. Because I do like the way on the Twitter stuff it shows the guest as the last frame, so you can sort of see who next week's guest is. Let me pop this in, and we'll put this up really quick. There we go, and we'll take that. We'll move this over here. I'll go to we'll go to podcast. That's what I call it, podcast art. I'll put this week's guest in from my thumb drive. This is taking longer than I thought. Okay, because I gotta find it. There we go. There we go. And now I can say this week's guest on the Rattlecast is going to be Sally Ashton. So Sally's poem, Listening to Mars, was a Poets Respond poem about a sound on the planet. I can't remember exactly. We'll have to reread that poem. It's going to be one poem she reads. But she has a new book. It's her 5th book of poetry, Listening to Mars. It's the title poem. And a really great poet. She's the editor of DMQ Review as well, so we can talk about being an editor, curating poems as well, talk about all her work, her teaching, all that sort of stuff. That's Rattlecast number 233. The prompt for this week was to write a haiku sequence after Joshua Eric Williams, who we saw a lot of great haiku, learned a lot of haiku again from him. It's a haiku sequence sort of relating to love. How do we phrase it? I gotta look up how we phrased it. It's like relating to love without saying the word love, that talks about love without mentioning it by name. That's how he put it. So write a haiku sequence that talks about love without mentioning it by name. That's your prompt for this week. Rattlecast number 232 is Sally Ashton, Monday, February 19th, the regular time, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. I hope to see you then. Hope you have a great weekend in the meantime, and I will talk to you later. Goodbye.